Good morning. This is Ron. It is Wednesday the 11th. Welcome to Story Time. And that's actually Wednesday, April the 11th. And today I'm going to be reading again the second part of the response from the Stimulus and Response, Chapter 13, Ayn Rand's book, Philosophy Who Needs It. And then after I'm done with that, then I will do a little story time extra. So when we left off on this chapter, we were doing, Ayn Rand was writing about various reviews and how those reviews stack up, intellectually speaking, various reviews of the book that B.F. Skinner wrote called Beyond Freedom and Dignity, and she left with the last one is let me see, by the Atlantic. So now we're moving on to another review in The New Leader. The review in The New Leader, January 10th, 1972, is cruder and more open. It declares, quote, "The reasonable man," Shaw said, "tries to adapt himself to the world," certainly the behaviorist's approach. "The unreasonable one persists in trying to adapt the world to himself. Therefore, all progress depends on the unreasonable man," unquote. Also, quote, "And behaviorism is still, thank God, a science, not a technology," unquote. Also, quote, "His history, no less than behavioristic experiments, proves that man is innately selfish. The manipulation of mankind is unacceptable, not because man is a noble being, but precisely because he is not. Those with power have always used it for their own ends, and there is no reason to suppose that their selfish occupations will diminish," unquote. This means one must assume that the totalitarian control and manipulation of noble, selfless beings by noble, selfless beings would be all right. Then there's this batch of small fry reviews which also echo similar sentiments or no sentiment at all, making feeble objections, carefully miss the point, and do not commit themselves to anything. One astonishing one is a piece in Science News, August 7th, 1971, which seems to be written by a teenager and makes a remarkable statement. Mr. Skinner's new book, it announces, may be one of the most important in the century. Quote, "Not only because it represents the summation of the Harvard psychologist's behavioristic approach to psychology, but because it goes beyond psychology into philosophy, and because Dr. Skinner's philosophy will probably be insulting to a great many people," unquote. Further, this experiment declares that, quote, "Dr. Skinner makes his arguments logically and rationally," unquote. After a collection of this kind, it is a relief to read the essay in the New York Review of Books, December 30th, 1971, entitled, quote, "The Case Against B.F. Skinner," unquote. The essay is neither apologetic nor sentimental. It is bright and forceful. It is a demolition job. What it demolishes is Mr. Skinner's scientific pretensions, and, to this extent, it is a defense of science. Quote, Skinner's, speculations are devoid of scientific content and do not even hint at general outlines of a possible science of human behavior," unquote. In regard to Skinner's claims, quote, "Claims must be evaluated according to the evidence presented for them. In the present instance, this is a simple task, since no evidence is presented. In fact, the question of evidence is beside the point, since the claims dissolve into triviality or incoherence under analysis," unquote. The reviewer employs one of the best methods of dealing with a false theory. He takes it literally. Quote, "If Skinner's thesis is false, then there is no point in having written this book or our reading it. But if this thesis is true, then there is also no point in his having written the book or our reading it. For the only point could be to modify behavior, and behavior, according to the thesis, is entirely controlled by arrangement of reinforcers. Therefore, reading the book can modify behavior only if it is a reinforcer. That is, if reading the book will increase the probability of the behavior that led to reading the book, assuming an appropriate state of deprivation. At this point, we seem to be reduced to gibberish," unquote. There are many other notable passages in that review, but its author is Noam Chomsky, who philosophically is a Cartesian linguist advocating a theory to the effect that man's mental processes are determined by innate ideas, and who politically belongs to the new left. I shall discuss shortly the two significant reviews that appeared in the New York Times, but the picture of our cultural devastation is clear. There are no defenders of reason in the country that was created not by the historical accident, but by philosophical design. There are no defenders of freedom in what had once been the only moral social system on earth. There are no defenders of man's mind in the world's greatest scientific technological civilization. All that is left is a battle between the mystics of spirit and the mystics of muscle, between men guided by their feelings and men guided by their reflexes. We are passengers on a plane flying at tremendous speed. One of these days we will discover that its cockpit is empty. Newspapers do not create a culture, they are its product. They are transmission belts that carry ideas from the universities to the general public. The New York Times is one of the most influential newspapers in this country and a good indicator of our cultural trends. It published two reviews of Mr. Skinner's book, which, in different ways, are the most objectionable ones of the lot. Quote, "There is just no gainsaying the profound importance of B.F. Skinner's new book, Beyond Freedom and Dignity. If you plan to read only one book this year, this is probably the one you should choose," unquote. This is the opening of the review in the Daily Times, September 22nd, 1971, the only essentially favorable review I have found. Quote, "Dr. Skinner's message is hard to take," unquote, the reviewer claims, but warns that, quote, "it cannot be dismissed so frivolously," unquote. Then, without protective evasions, he summarizes accurately the brutal essentials of Mr. Skinner's thesis and declares, quote, "all of which is logically unassailable," unquote, emphasis added. Attempting apparently to resist the thesis, he states that, quote, "one tries reviewing the traditional criticisms of behaviorism even here. But even here, Skinner is not nearly so vulnerable as he once seemed, for he has confronted his many critics with telling counter-arguments. To those who call his program totalitarian, he replies that the relation between the controller and the controlled is reciprocal." This refers to the passage on page 169 of Mr. Skinner's book, which is quoted. Please reread in order to judge whether that is a, quote, "telling counter-argument," unquote. Quote, "No, none of the familiar objections to behaviorism will suffice to demolish Beyond Freedom and Dignity," unquote, the reviewer sighs. "The book remains logically tenable. I don't like it, which is to say it doesn't reinforce me in the manner to which I am accustomed," unquote. To make a concession of this kind is to confess that one has no grounds for one's convictions and that one is not aware of one's own mental processes. The concession is followed by an odd statement. Quote, "but for the moment, the only retort that I can think of is that conceived by Dostoevsky's, quote, underground man," unquote, to, quote, "deliberately go mad to prove, quote, unquote, that all behavior cannot be predicted or controlled. But such a response might not prove very useful to me or the culture. So we may indeed be trapped in a Skinnerian maze," unquote. What is odd here is the fact that the quotation from Dostoevsky's underground man is not a retort the reviewer thought of spontaneously. This very quotation is discussed by Mr. Skinner on pages 164 to 165 of his book and is properly dismissed. At first glance, the review creates the impression that it was written by an earnest intellectual who struggled desperately against the necessity of accepting a totalitarian state, but failed to find counter-arguments and give in reluctantly to the power of unanswerable logic. After one has read the book, one asks, is that the reviewer's case? Or is that the case of a man eager to convince us that Mr. Skinner's thesis is unanswerable? The review in the New York Times Book Review is different. It is unfavorable. It declares that Skinner has a secret motive, a hidden agenda, which is unknown to him but known to the reviewer. Quote, "the actual text of Skinner's new book reveals a man desperately in search of some way to preserve the old-fashioned virtues associated with 19th century individualism in a world where self-reliance no longer makes sense," unquote. Which virtues? Hard work, believe it or not. Quote, "first behavior control appears to him in a way to get people hard at work again in an age where indolence is rife," unquote. If hard work is the essential characteristic of individualism, then the Nazi and Soviet forced labor camps are examples of individualism unmatched in the 19th or any other century. But there is no discussion or advocacy of hard work in Mr. Skinner's book, and nothing to justify the allegation that this is his first concern. Quote, the hidden agenda can be first be detected in the way Skinner talks about controlling behavior. All his attention is centered on situations where one person is being controlled. He employs such phrases as a person's behavior or operant conditioning of the subject. He seldom refers to different controls for different kinds of social groups. Even Mr. Skinner does not deserve a reviewer of this kind. Many people are unable to deal with metaphysical questions, but this one is militantly aggressive about it. He is so rabid a collectivist that he will not tolerate any concern with the individual, even for the purpose of destroying him. He does not see that if his own beliefs are to be put into practice, it is Mr. Skinner who is laying the necessary foundation. If a doctor stated that a man needs food and were criticized as follows, which man does he mean, Smith or Jones? Different men need different foods. And he hasn't said anything about the poor, the black, the young, and the women. The Skidunk Gazette would not publish it. Yet this type of mentality is published on the front page of the New York Times Book Review. If you think I am exaggerating, judge the following. The reviewer picks on a passage in which Mr. Skinner attempts to teach us behaviorist language by describing a young man's emotional states in behaviorist terms. E.g., Mr. Skinner translates, quote, he feels uneasy or anxious, unquote, into, quote, his behavior frequently has unavoidable aversive consequences which have emotional effects, unquote. The reviewers comment, quote, but Professor, there's a war on. Why aren't you talking about the social cause of his behavior? Why do you treat him as though he lives in a vacuum, unquote. Mr. Skinner is not only too individualistic, the reviewer claims, but also too rational. Quote, while Heisenberg contemplated the unpredictable behavior of matter, Skinner insists that we must find unambiguous facts about human behavior. The difference is between wanting to explore the world as it is and wanting to possess knowledge. The possession of knowledge, of hard facts you can act on, is an echo of 19th century positivistic science, just as Skinner's beliefs are an echo of that century's small town society, unquote. And that is the end of part 2 of the response of the stimulus and response, chapter 13, in the book by Ayn Rand called Philosophy: Who Needs It? And so I think it's a lot of the work in here is excellent in her analysis of different reviews, looking at different reviews and which ones are good criticisms of Mr. Skinner's work and which ones are either not criticisms in disguise, such as the New York Times, or friendly to him. So one of the things I wanted to mention too is that a lot of times you can have, again, a criticism that is disguised, so to speak, so that you're actually appearing to be well thought out, and in a lot of cases in which it's basically rather shallow. The example is from the let's see, where is it here? New York Times, one of the most influential newspapers in the. Yeah, from the one from the New York Times then, about Dr. Skinner's book, and it's hard to take, blah, blah, all of which is logically unassailable. One of the things that the left likes to do is to make what they will do is declare something as a fact in which in what case what they're really actually doing is making an affirmation. And that's what they're basically doing in this particular case, because it says logically unassailable, but gives no evidence or proof that his book is airtight at all. And so it becomes an affirmation. What it becomes is a psychological tool in order to convince people and bully and intimidate people into accepting the work, B.F. Skinner's work, uncritically. And so there's a lot of that that's going on here too. So that is, like I said, the end of part two of the response of the stimulus and response. And I'll be back in a minute and give you the story time extra. Okay, and I'm back. And the Storytime Extra is going to be a short critique of Rush Limbaugh's show from one of the segments of Rush Limbaugh's show from yesterday, April 10th, 2018. And it's I'm getting the information from his app, the Rush Limbaugh Show app. And the particular segment in question is titled Remember the Washington Establishment's Objective. Get rid of Trump. And that's from yesterday. Um, Rush. Well, I don't want to make this personal, but I have to tell you folks, this stuff scares me. Stuff going on with the deep state, the Washington establishment, whatever you want to call them, and their never ending pursuit of Donald Trump. Either get rid of him or to paralyze his presidency. The lengths to which these people are willing to go openly and brazenly is frightening. Greetings. Great to have you. It's 1-800-282-2882 if you want to be on the program. The email address, lrushbo@eibnet.us. The thing I have to keep in mind as I keep up with the latest so-called developments of this story, the one thing that you always have to keep in mind if you want, I think, to have the best chance of understanding what's going on and putting it all into some kind of perspective, you have to remember that the objective of all this is to get rid of Donald Trump. From the moment Trump won the election, the tampering with his transition, the creation of the Steele dossier, the use of the FBI and the DOJ, and the entire apparatus of the Washington establishment, to the appointment of Mueller as special counsel, the whole purpose of that has been to reverse the outcome of a fair and duly constituted election that many in this Washington establishment, simply do not wish to accept. So we've had terms being thrown around like coup or silent coup, however you want to phrase it or characterize it. Everything that's happening, you must keep in perspective, is happening underneath the umbrella of the objective is to get Donald Trump. So now when you accept that, then look at everything, whether what's happened yesterday and last night or what happened last week or last month, then you have a better chance of keeping it all in perspective and understanding what's happening. The one thing that I've noticed, let's take a look. The FBI is being squeezed by Congress for FISA documents from Obama's time in office. The FBI has been ignoring subpoenas from various congressional committees for many, many months. Get this, Tom Fitton of Judicial Watch was just told that the FBI told him it will take 3 years to produce the file containing all of the text messages between Peter Strzok and Lisa Page. 3 years. Freedom of Information Act request. 3 years to produce what the Inspector General already has. But nevertheless, the FBI is being squeezed, and publicly. Members of the Congressional Committee going on TV expressing outrage the FBI will not cooperate, sending them redacted stuff, not sending them anything at all. These documents currently being sought, FISA documents, are from Obama's time in office. We've also had Trump's favorability ratings rise. In the Rasmussen Report's daily tracking survey, Trump is over 50%. We've also had news that the Department of Justice has an Inspector General report coming out soon that's going to be critical of the FBI. So naturally, you would expect the FBI and the DOJ to do something to deflect attention from all that. And they did. They raided the offices of President Trump's personal attorney. So I'm going to it goes on, but that kind of helps me gives me something to work with here, so to speak. And where Rush Limbaugh is wrong here is that the objective here of the left is not to get rid of Donald Trump. The left doesn't give a damn about individuals. They don't care about Donald Trump. They don't care about Hillary Clinton. They don't care about any particular individual. Their motive is what it's always been, and that is violent revolution worldwide, and the ushering in of worldwide socialist paradise. Now, for the left, they're in an enviable position that no matter which way an election turns out, they have a sort of an advantage. If Hillary Clinton had won the White House and were president, then they could agitate for revolution, but using her as a sort of a surrogate, as a puppet for, as they did with Barack Obama, in which case they had a lot of situations where Barack Obama was sitting by the wayside, for instance, during the Occupy movement and various other types of movement, where you are expecting to hear maybe from the President of the United States, because these are movements, the Occupy movement and the Black Lives Matter movement were movements that were at least becoming, if not completely national in scope. And you would figure the President of the United States would have something to say about it. But Mr. Obama was completely silent. And you would expect the same kind of a situation then if Hillary Clinton is president. Now, Hillary Clinton's not president, it's Donald Trump. So, how Donald Trump can be as big of an asset to the left as Hillary Clinton would have been, but just in a different way. Okay, they're still looking for a revolution, and Donald Trump's um, election has outraged a lot of people. Not, of course, the people that voted for him and that support him, but the people that supported Hillary Clinton, the people primarily of the left. So, what they want to do is keep Donald Trump's name and face keep his name in the headlines, keep his face on television, so as to further irritate, annoy, and agitate the people that are anti-Trump, so that again they will take steps, more steps to start in the process of worldwide revolution and eventually ushering in a worldwide socialist paradise. And we know that their objective is not just to simply to get rid of Donald Trump, which is a shallow analysis, because if that were their sole objective, they would have given up a long time ago. Donald Trump's been in office for over a year. There's only three ways to get rid of him. Either he resigns, he is forced out of office from a legal standpoint, such as or health. Let's say his health deteriorates to the point where he can no longer carry on, or he can be impeached and removed from office as a punishment for an impeachment trial, or he can be termed out of office or voted out of office. So, in right now, the election isn't going to be until 2020, so that's out, and there is no evidence that he is anywhere close to resigning. There's no evidence that he has any health issues that are going to slow him down or stop him. And there's absolutely no evidence that he is in any danger now or anytime in the near future of being impeached and forced out of office that way. The other thing that we know about Donald Trump is what Rush Limbaugh put in his article that furthers this idea that he is he's not the target, really, and that is that his favorability ratings rise. And Rasmussen reports, I'm quoting Rush here, daily tracking survey, Trump is over 50%. Okay, so he's got his approvable ratings have been going up. Their best shot at getting rid of Donald Trump one way or another was last year. The fact that he's made it a year in office is he's gotten things done, a lot of things done, like it or hate it. He's gotten things done. And as he goes, and the more things that he gets done, the more he cements himself into the position of President of the United States, and the more difficult it makes to go ahead and get him out of office by force, by, say, an impeachment, for instance. The phrase that pops to my mind is that he's tougher than a boll weevil in a sugar jar. So, that's, again, Rush Limbaugh's analysis is flawed, and it's flawed because it is shallow. And it is typical of Mr. Limbaugh that his analyses are frequently shallow. He still has the idea that it is politics that drives our culture, which is wrong. It is the other way around. It is our culture that drives our politics. And so it also has a little bit of a ring of his statement about Trump of a malevolent universe premise, in which nothing can be known with certainty, everything is scary, and failure is to be expected. when the reality is exactly the opposite. And that's one of the things that Donald Trump knows. He may not know that he knows it, but this is where he and President Reagan had the same thing. They both knew that this is a benevolent universe, that things can be known with certainty, they are known with certainty, and that success is to be expected. And so, with Donald Trump, what we should be is not looking for him to fail one way or another, either by his own efforts or by the efforts of somebody else. But we should be looking forward to his success. The fact that more than likely he is going to finish out his term, and probably, if he runs, which he's indicated he will, actually be reelected. So that's the end of my storytime episode. My regular episode up front, and this is a little story time extra in the middle. And tomorrow we'll be doing some more of the same. So thank you very much for joining me, and have a great day.